As the strike extends into its third week, both teachers and the provincial government face mounting pressure to find a resolution. The Alberta Teachers Association, ATA, continues to stress that their demands go beyond salary negotiations, emphasizing the critical need for systemic reforms in education. Union leaders highlight that classroom overcrowding, insufficient support for students with special needs, and a shortage of educational resources are ongoing challenges that threaten both teacher well-being and student outcomes. Teachers have reported high levels of stress and burnout in recent years, exacerbated by pandemic-related disruptions, and argue that without meaningful change, these problems will continue to worsen. Public statements from educators underscore that the strike is intended not only to secure fair compensation but also to protect the quality and sustainability of Alberta's education system for future generations. Parents are navigating unprecedented challenges due to the prolonged school closures. Many families are attempting to balance work responsibilities with supervising children's remote learning, arranging alternative childcare, or seeking temporary educational support from private tutors or community programs. Urban families, particularly in Calgary and Edmonton, report juggling multiple schedules and limited access to consistent supervision, while rural households face additional difficulties due to unreliable internet connectivity and fewer available resources. The strain on families has sparked widespread conversation about the social and economic impact of the strike, highlighting disparities in access to educational support and reinforcing the broader societal implications of prolonged labor disputes. Students have become increasingly visible stakeholders in the strike. Across Alberta, high school and even some middle school students have organized demonstrations, social media campaigns, and letter-writing initiatives to advocate for their teachers and improved educational conditions. These efforts reflect a growing trend of youth civic engagement and demonstrate that students recognize the impact of systemic underfunding on their education. Student advocacy adds a moral and public pressure component to the dispute, emphasizing that the strike is not only a negotiation between educators and government officials but a broader societal concern affecting families, communities, and the province's future workforce. Media coverage of these student-led initiatives has amplified public awareness and helped to humanize the conflict, showing the direct impact of policy decisions on young learners. The government has maintained that its contract offer, which includes salary increases and the hiring of 3,000 additional teachers, represents a balanced and fiscally responsible approach. Premier Danielle Smith has emphasized the province's willingness to engage in negotiations, while warning that excessive demands could jeopardize fiscal stability and strain public services. Opposition parties, however, have criticized the government's approach, arguing that the offer does not adequately address structural deficiencies in the education system. Analysts note that Alberta has faced long-standing challenges in funding and resource allocation for education, and the current strike highlights the consequences of systemic underinvestment. Media coverage has portrayed both sides of the debate, providing a platform for teachers, parents, and students to express concerns, while also examining government constraints and policy decisions. The economic impact of the strike continues to ripple across communities. Local businesses that rely on school traffic, such as childcare centers, after-school programs, and youth activity providers, have reported declines in revenue. Families are incurring additional costs for private tutoring, alternative childcare arrangements, or technology resources to support remote learning. Teachers participating in the strike receive financial support from union funds, but many still experience economic pressure, particularly those supporting families or with limited personal savings. Economists warn that prolonged educational disruption can have broader implications, including reduced workforce participation and long-term productivity losses, reinforcing the need for timely resolution. Historical context underscores the significance of Alberta's strike. Teacher labor actions in Canada have a long history of shaping policy, public debate, and educational outcomes. The 1997 Ontario teachers' strike involved over 126,000 educators and led to extensive school closures, influencing funding and labor negotiations nationwide. Similarly, the 1987 Metro Toronto elementary teachers' strike demonstrated the power of organized teacher action to catalyze public debate and influence government policy. Alberta's current strike, while unique in its circumstances, continues this tradition, highlighting the ability of collective bargaining in education to generate attention, mobilize public support, and advocate for meaningful reforms that benefit both educators and students. Media coverage continues to play a pivotal role in shaping public perception. National and local outlets report on the human impact of the strike, featuring stories of overworked teachers, concerned parents, and students whose education is disrupted. Analytical coverage examines the broader implications, including budgetary constraints, policy priorities, and the potential long-term consequences of the labor dispute. Social media has also become a central forum for discussion, with real-time updates, personal testimonials, and community mobilization amplifying the voices of educators, parents, and students alike. The combination of traditional media and digital platforms ensures that the strike remains a highly visible public issue, reinforcing both the immediacy and the complexity of the dispute. Negotiations remain tense and complex. While both the ATA and the government have signaled willingness to engage, entrenched positions and the absence of scheduled meetings suggest that compromise will be challenging. Experts indicate that a successful resolution will likely require a multifaceted approach, including incremental salary adjustments, additional hiring of support staff, structural reforms to reduce class sizes, and targeted investments in student resources. Such measures would address both the immediate concerns driving the strike and the long-term sustainability of Alberta's education system. The outcome will have lasting implications for labor relations, student achievement, and public confidence in the government's commitment to education. As the strike continues, the broader societal stakes become increasingly apparent. The dispute highlights the interdependence of teachers, students, parents, and communities, emphasizing that public education is a fundamental social institution with wide-reaching impacts. Conversations about funding, labor rights, and classroom conditions have engaged not only those directly involved but also the broader public, prompting debate about equity, access, and the long-term sustainability of educational policy. For Alberta, the strike represents both a crisis and an opportunity, a crisis in terms of immediate disruption, but an opportunity to re-evaluate and strengthen the structures, supports, and values that underpin the province's education system. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape the province's educational landscape, labor relations, and community expectations for years to come. By the fourth week of the Alberta teachers' strike, tensions have intensified, and the long-term implications for students, families, and communities are becoming clearer. Teachers have maintained a united front, emphasizing that the strike is about more than salaries, it is about protecting the quality and sustainability of education in Alberta. Union leaders point to systemic issues such as overcrowded classrooms, inadequate support for students with special needs, and limited mental health and counseling resources as urgent concerns. Educators report that these conditions not only impact their own well-being but also affect the learning outcomes and overall development of students. Public statements from ATA officials reiterate that the strike is a principled effort to secure meaningful reforms that will benefit future generations, highlighting that investments in education are investments in the province's long-term social and economic health. Families continue to experience significant disruptions as schools remain closed. Parents are forced to balance work commitments with supervising children's learning at home, arranging alternative childcare, and managing household routines around educational needs. Urban families in cities such as Calgary and Edmonton report considerable stress in coordinating schedules and ensuring children remain engaged academically. Rural households face compounded challenges due to limited internet connectivity, fewer community resources, and reduced access to supplemental educational programs. These disparities have sparked discussion about equity in education, with many observers noting that students in under-resourced areas are at heightened risk of academic setbacks during extended school closures. Community organizations and volunteer initiatives have emerged to provide structured activities, tutoring, and supervised learning, but these measures cannot fully replicate the resources and environment offered by in-person schooling. Student advocacy has become an increasingly visible component of the strike. Across Alberta, high school and even some middle school students have organized rallies, social media campaigns, and petitions to support their teachers and advocate for enhanced educational conditions. These initiatives demonstrate that students recognize the broader implications of systemic underfunding on their education and are willing to engage actively in civic discourse. Student involvement adds moral weight to the strike, reinforcing the argument that the dispute affects not just teachers' livelihoods but also the learning and development of the province's youth. Media coverage of student-led demonstrations has amplified public awareness and highlighted the human dimension of the conflict, showing the tangible impact of policy decisions on everyday learners. The provincial government continues to maintain that its contract offer represents a balanced approach. Premier Danielle Smith has reiterated that salary increases combined with the hiring of 3,000 additional teachers reflect a fair and fiscally responsible compromise. Government officials stress the importance of fiscal prudence, warning that further concessions could threaten the stability of other public services. Critics, however, argue that the government's offer does not adequately address long-standing structural deficiencies in Alberta's education system. They contend that underfunding has contributed to overcrowded classrooms, overworked teachers, and insufficient support for students with diverse learning needs. Media coverage has presented both perspectives, illustrating the tension between fiscal responsibility and educational quality. Social media continues to amplify the voices of teachers, students, and parents, creating a highly visible and emotionally charged public dialogue. Economic consequences of the strike are increasingly apparent. Local businesses, particularly those dependent on school traffic, such as childcare centers, after-school programs, and youth activity providers, have experienced noticeable declines in revenue. Families face additional costs for private tutoring, alternative childcare, and technology needed to support remote learning. Teachers, while receiving temporary support from union funds, must manage the financial impact of reduced income during the strike. Economists warn that prolonged labor disruptions in education can have wider economic effects, potentially affecting workforce participation, productivity, and social cohesion. The intersection of labor disputes and economic stability underscores the importance of reaching a timely resolution that balances the needs of educators, families, and the broader community. Historical context highlights the significance of Alberta's strike. Teacher labor actions in Canada have historically influenced policy and public discourse, demonstrating the capacity of organized educators to shape social and political outcomes. The 1997 Ontario teachers' strike, involving over 126,000 educators, led to widespread school closures and had lasting effects on education policy and labor negotiations. Similarly, the 1987 Metro Toronto elementary teachers' strike showcased the power of collective teacher action to catalyze public debate and influence government decision-making. Alberta's current strike, though unique in its specific circumstances, continues this tradition, emphasizing that teacher advocacy plays a critical role in shaping both immediate labor outcomes and long-term educational policy. Negotiations remain stalled, with entrenched positions on both sides complicating prospects for a timely resolution. While the ATA has signaled a willingness to continue discussions, union leaders insist that meaningful reforms must accompany any financial settlement. The government, in turn, maintains that fiscal constraints limit the scope of potential concessions. Analysts suggest that a comprehensive resolution will likely require a combination of incremental salary adjustments, the hiring of additional support staff, structural reforms to reduce class sizes, and targeted investments in student resources. These measures would address both the immediate concerns driving the strike and the long-term sustainability of the education system. The outcome will have lasting implications for labor relations, student achievement, and public confidence in governance. Public sentiment remains mixed. Many parents and community members continue to support teachers' demands, recognizing the strain caused by overcrowded classrooms and under-resourced schools. Others express frustration at the disruption to children's education and the challenges posed by extended school closures. Media coverage, including feature stories on families, teachers, and students, has highlighted the human impact of the strike while analyzing policy and budgetary considerations. Social media has amplified diverse perspectives, from expressions of solidarity with educators to debates over government accountability and fiscal priorities. The strike has thus become not only a labor dispute but a broader societal conversation about the value of public education, equitable access to resources, and the responsibility of government to support learning communities. As the strike continues, its social, economic, and political dimensions remain deeply intertwined. The dispute underscores the interdependence of educators, students, families, and communities, highlighting that public education is a critical social institution with far-reaching consequences. Discussions about funding, labor rights, and classroom conditions engage not only those directly involved but the wider public, prompting debates about equity, access, and the long-term viability of education policy. For Alberta, the strike represents both immediate disruption and a pivotal opportunity to re-evaluate and strengthen the structures, resources, and supports that underpin the province's education system. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape the future of public education, labor relations, and community expectations for years to come, with lasting implications for the province's social and economic development. As the strike enters its fifth week, the ramifications for Alberta's education system, families, and communities have grown increasingly complex. Teachers remain steadfast in their demands, emphasizing that the dispute is not solely about salaries but about ensuring the sustainability and quality of the education system. Overcrowded classrooms, insufficient support for students with special needs, and inadequate access to mental health and counseling resources have long been identified as critical challenges that threaten both teacher well-being and student outcomes. Educators argue that without meaningful systemic reforms, these problems will continue to escalate, contributing to teacher burnout, declining student engagement, and inequities across the province. Union leaders stress that the strike represents a principled effort to address these structural issues, asserting that the temporary disruption caused by labor action is justified by the long-term benefits for Alberta's students and educators. Families continue to adapt to the prolonged absence of in-person schooling. Many parents have had to reorganize work schedules, arrange temporary childcare, and provide supervision for remote learning. Urban households, particularly those with multiple children or single-income parents, report significant strain as they balance work responsibilities with educational oversight. Rural families face additional challenges, including limited access to reliable internet and fewer community resources, which exacerbates educational disparities. In response, some communities have mobilized volunteer-led tutoring programs, after-school support initiatives, and alternative learning environments to help bridge the gap. While these efforts provide some relief, they cannot fully replicate the structured environment, resources, and expertise offered by qualified teachers in schools, underscoring the broader consequences of the labor disruption. Students themselves have become increasingly visible participants in the dispute. Across Alberta, high school and even some middle school students have organized rallies, social media campaigns, and petitions in support of teachers and improved learning conditions. This youth engagement reflects a growing recognition that policy and labor decisions directly affect their education and future prospects. Student advocacy adds a moral dimension to the strike, reinforcing the notion that the dispute extends beyond teacher compensation to the quality and accessibility of education for the province's young learners. Media coverage of student-led initiatives has amplified public awareness, humanizing the conflict and highlighting the tangible impact of policy decisions on everyday students. The provincial government continues to insist that its contract offer, which includes salary increases and the hiring of 3,000 additional teachers, represents a fair and fiscally responsible solution. Premier Danielle Smith has emphasized the government's willingness to negotiate while cautioning that excessive demands could threaten the stability of public finances and other essential services. Critics, however, argue that the offer fails to address systemic underfunding in Alberta's education system. They assert that structural deficiencies, such as insufficient staffing, inadequate classroom resources, and limited support for students with diverse learning needs, require comprehensive reforms that go beyond immediate salary adjustments. Media coverage reflects these competing perspectives, documenting both the human impact of the strike and the policy debates surrounding funding, labor relations, and public accountability. Economic consequences of the strike continue to unfold. Local businesses, particularly those dependent on school-related activity such as childcare centers, after-school programs, and youth-oriented services, have reported declines in revenue. Families incur additional costs for private tutoring, temporary childcare, and technology to facilitate remote learning. Teachers, while supported in part by union funds, experience reductions in income that can impact household finances. Economists warn that sustained educational disruption can have broader effects, including decreased workforce participation, reduced productivity, and potential long-term impacts on the provincial economy. The intersection of labor disputes and economic stability underscores the urgency of reaching a resolution that balances fiscal responsibility with the needs of educators, students, and families. Historical context underscores the significance of Alberta's strike. Canada has a long tradition of teacher labor action influencing policy, public debate, and educational outcomes. The 1997 Ontario teachers' strike, involving over 126,000 educators, led to widespread school closures and long-term policy changes. Similarly, the 1987 Metro Toronto elementary teachers' strike demonstrated the capacity of organized teacher action to shape public opinion and government decision-making. Alberta's current strike continues this legacy, illustrating how collective bargaining in the education sector can generate public attention, mobilize support, and advocate for reforms that enhance both teacher working conditions and student learning outcomes. Negotiations remain fraught, with both sides holding entrenched positions. The ATA has signaled willingness to engage in meaningful discussions but insists that structural reforms must accompany any financial settlement. The government emphasizes fiscal constraints and the need for responsible budgeting, while also maintaining that it remains open to compromise. Analysts suggest that an effective resolution will likely require a combination of incremental salary increases, hiring additional support staff, reforms to reduce class sizes, and targeted investments in student resources. Such measures would address both the immediate drivers of the strike and the long-term sustainability of Alberta's education system. The outcome of the dispute will have lasting implications for labor relations, educational quality, and public trust in government. Public opinion remains divided. Many parents and community members support teachers' demands, recognizing the strain on classrooms and the importance of equitable educational resources. Others express frustration with the disruption to their children's schooling and the challenges associated with managing extended school closures. Media coverage has highlighted both sides, providing platforms for educators, students, and families to share their experiences while analyzing government policy, budgetary considerations, and potential outcomes. Social media has further amplified these discussions, enabling real-time updates, community mobilization, and engagement from stakeholders across the province. The strike has evolved into a broad societal debate about the value of public education, equitable access, and the responsibilities of government to support learning communities. As the strike progresses, its social, economic, and political dimensions remain deeply intertwined. The dispute highlights the interconnectedness of educators, students, parents, and communities, emphasizing that public education is a foundational social institution with extensive societal impact. Conversations regarding funding, labor rights, and classroom conditions engage not only those directly involved but also the broader public, prompting debates about equity, access, and the long-term viability of education policy. For Alberta, the strike represents both an immediate disruption and a critical opportunity to reassess and strengthen the structures, supports, and values underpinning the province's education system. Decisions made in the coming weeks will shape Alberta's educational landscape, labor relations, and community expectations for years to come, with far-reaching implications for social and economic development. By the sixth week of Alberta's teachers' strike, the full scale of its impact is becoming evident across the province. Classrooms remain empty, and educational disruption has reached a point where students' academic progress is increasingly at risk. Teachers continue to underscore that the strike is about much more than salaries. It is a fight to secure sustainable working conditions, equitable access to educational resources, and a quality learning environment for all students. Union leaders highlight persistent issues including overcrowded classrooms, insufficient special education support, and limited access to mental health resources, which have been exacerbated by years of underfunding. The ATA emphasizes that addressing these systemic challenges is essential not only for teacher retention but also for student outcomes, arguing that the strike represents a necessary intervention to protect the long-term viability of Alberta's education system. Parents continue to navigate significant challenges as schools remain closed. Many families have had to reorganize work schedules, coordinate childcare, and supervise home-based learning for multiple children simultaneously. Urban households report particular strain in balancing professional commitments with educational responsibilities, while rural families face additional obstacles due to inconsistent internet connectivity and limited access to supplemental learning resources. These disparities have highlighted ongoing inequities within Alberta's education system, raising concerns about potential long-term learning gaps among students in under-resourced areas. Community organizations and volunteer-led initiatives have sought to provide temporary relief, offering tutoring, structured activities, and supervised learning programs. However, these solutions are limited in scope and cannot fully replicate the support, expertise, and social environment provided by in-person schooling. Student engagement in the dispute has become more pronounced. Across cities such as Calgary, Edmonton, and Red Deer, high school and middle school students have organized rallies, petitions, and online campaigns to support teachers and advocate for systemic reforms. These actions demonstrate that students recognize the impact of policy decisions on their education and are increasingly willing to participate in civic discourse. Student advocacy has added a moral and public dimension to the strike, reinforcing the argument that the dispute affects not only teachers' professional conditions but also the learning experiences and opportunities of young learners. Media coverage of these initiatives has amplified public attention, portraying students as active stakeholders in shaping the quality and accessibility of education in Alberta. The government maintains that its contract proposal, which includes salary increases and the hiring of 3,000 additional teachers, represents a responsible and balanced solution. Premier Danielle Smith has emphasized the province's commitment to negotiation while warning that further concessions could risk fiscal stability and strain other public services. Critics argue that the offer fails to address structural deficiencies in Alberta's schools, pointing to chronic underfunding, insufficient staffing, and inadequate classroom resources. Analysts highlight that these systemic issues predate the strike and have contributed to teacher burnout, student learning gaps, and inequities across the province. Media coverage has explored both sides of the debate, documenting the human impact of school closures while analyzing fiscal, policy, and labor-related considerations. Economic ramifications continue to unfold as a result of the strike. Local businesses that depend on school traffic, such as childcare centers, after-school programs, and youth activity providers, have reported decreases in revenue. Families are incurring additional costs for private tutoring, childcare, and technology to support remote learning. Teachers participating in the strike receive some financial support from union funds, but many still face reduced income and financial stress. Economists warn that extended disruptions in education can have broader societal effects, including diminished workforce participation, reduced productivity, and longer-term economic consequences. The interplay between labor disputes and economic stability highlights the urgent need for a resolution that balances fiscal responsibility with the well-being of educators, students, and communities. Historical precedent provides insight into the significance of Alberta's strike. Canada has a long-standing history of teacher labor action influencing policy, public perception, and educational outcomes. The 1997 Ontario teachers' strike involved over 126,000 educators and caused widespread school closures, while the 1987 Metro Toronto elementary teachers' strike demonstrated the ability of collective teacher action to shape public debate and influence government decision-making. Alberta's current strike continues this legacy, illustrating how organized labor in the education sector can generate public attention, mobilize support, and advocate for systemic reforms that benefit both teachers and students. Negotiations remain complex and protracted. The ATA has expressed willingness to engage in meaningful discussions but insists that structural reforms must accompany any financial settlement. The government emphasizes fiscal constraints while signaling openness to compromise, highlighting the tension between financial prudence and the urgent need for educational improvements. Analysts suggest that an effective resolution will require a combination of incremental salary increases, hiring additional support staff, class size reductions, and targeted investments in student resources. Addressing both immediate labor concerns and long-term systemic challenges is crucial for sustaining Alberta's education system and maintaining public confidence in governance. Public sentiment remains mixed. Many parents and community members support the strike, acknowledging the strain caused by overcrowded classrooms and insufficient resources, while others express frustration at the disruption to students' education and the logistical challenges of prolonged school closures. Media coverage has amplified both perspectives, documenting the personal experiences of teachers, students, and families while analyzing government policy and budgetary considerations. Social media platforms have further expanded the conversation, allowing real-time updates, community mobilization, and engagement from stakeholders across the province. The strike has thus evolved into a broader societal debate, encompassing issues of public education, labor rights, equity, and government accountability. As the strike continues, the stakes remain high. The dispute underscores the interconnectedness of educators, students, families, and communities, emphasizing that public education is a critical social institution with wide-ranging societal implications. Discussions surrounding funding, labor conditions, and classroom resources engage not only those directly involved but also the broader public, fostering dialogue about equity, access, and the long-term sustainability of educational policy. For Alberta, the strike represents both an immediate disruption and a pivotal opportunity to reassess and strengthen the structures, supports, and values underpinning the province's education system. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape Alberta's educational landscape, labor relations, and community expectations for years to come, with lasting effects on the province's social and economic development. By the 7th week of Alberta's teachers' strike, the full scale of its impact on the province's education system, families, and communities is unmistakable. Classrooms remain largely empty, and the ongoing disruption has created widespread concern about long-term effects on student learning and development. Teachers have consistently emphasized that the strike is about more than wages. It is a critical effort to secure sustainable working conditions, equitable access to resources, and a high-quality learning environment for all students. Union leaders continue to highlight systemic challenges, including overcrowded classrooms, insufficient special education support, and limited mental health and counseling services, which have been exacerbated by years of underfunding. Educators argue that without meaningful reforms, these issues will continue to worsen, contributing to burnout, attrition, and declining student outcomes. The Alberta Teachers Association maintains that the strike is a necessary intervention to ensure that both teachers and students have the support and resources they need to succeed. Families continue to face substantial challenges as the strike persists. Many parents have had to adjust work schedules, coordinate childcare, and supervise home-based learning for multiple children, often juggling professional and educational responsibilities simultaneously. Urban households report significant stress due to the complexities of managing multiple children and coordinating access to technology for remote learning. Rural families face additional hurdles, including inconsistent internet connectivity and limited local educational resources, which exacerbate disparities and raise concerns about potential long-term learning gaps. Community organizations and volunteer-led programs have stepped in to provide supplementary support, including tutoring, structured activities, and supervised learning environments. Yet these measures cannot fully replicate the comprehensive educational services delivered by trained teachers in schools. The ongoing disruptions have intensified discussions about educational equity and the need for systemic reform. Student engagement has become increasingly visible in the dispute. Across Alberta, high school and some middle school students have organized rallies, petitions, and online campaigns in support of teachers and improved learning conditions. These initiatives demonstrate that students recognize the direct impact of policy and labor decisions on their education and are willing to participate actively in civic discourse. Student advocacy adds both moral weight and public visibility to the strike, highlighting that the dispute affects not only educators' professional lives but also the quality of education and future opportunities for Alberta's youth. Media coverage has amplified these efforts, showcasing students' voices and bringing greater attention to the human consequences of prolonged school closures. The provincial government continues to maintain that its contract offer, which includes salary increases and the hiring of 3,000 additional teachers, represents a balanced and fiscally responsible approach. Premier Danielle Smith has emphasized the government's commitment to negotiation while warning that excessive demands could jeopardize fiscal stability and strain other public services. Critics argue that the offer falls short of addressing long-standing structural deficiencies, including underfunding, inadequate staffing, and insufficient classroom resources. Analysts note that these issues have contributed to teacher burnout, student learning gaps, and inequities across Alberta, and that resolving them will require more than short-term financial incentives. Media coverage has presented both sides of the debate, documenting the human impact while analyzing fiscal, policy, and labor considerations, creating a highly visible public dialogue. Economic ramifications of the strike continue to manifest throughout the province. Local businesses dependent on school-related traffic, such as childcare centers, after-school programs, and youth activity providers, report declines in revenue. Families incur additional costs for private tutoring, alternative childcare, and technology to support remote learning. Teachers, while supported in part by union funds, experience reduced income and financial stress. Economists caution that prolonged disruption in education can have broader societal effects, including diminished workforce participation, decreased productivity, and long-term economic consequences. The interplay between labor disputes, education, and economic stability underscores the urgency of reaching a resolution that balances fiscal responsibility with the needs of educators, students, and families. Historical context highlights the significance of Alberta's strike. Teacher labor actions in Canada have historically influenced public policy, shaped social discourse, and driven reforms in educational practice. The 1997 Ontario teachers' strike, involving over 126,000 educators, led to widespread school closures and had lasting effects on labor negotiations and funding policy. Similarly, the 1987 Metro Toronto elementary teachers' strike demonstrated the power of collective teacher action to shape public opinion and government decision-making. Alberta's current strike continues this tradition, illustrating the role of organized labor in advocating for systemic improvements, amplifying public awareness, and driving long-term reforms that benefit both teachers and students. Negotiations remain tense and complex. The ATA has expressed willingness to continue discussions but insists that structural reforms must accompany any financial settlement. The government emphasizes fiscal constraints while signaling openness to compromise, highlighting the ongoing tension between financial prudence and the urgent need for educational improvements. Analysts suggest that a comprehensive resolution will likely require incremental salary adjustments, hiring additional support staff, reductions in class sizes, and targeted investments in student resources. Addressing both immediate labor concerns and long-term systemic challenges is critical to maintaining Alberta's education system and public confidence in governance. Public sentiment remains divided. Many parents and community members continue to support teachers, acknowledging the challenges of overcrowded classrooms and inadequate resources, while others express frustration with the disruption to students' education and the logistical complexities of extended school closures. Media coverage has provided a platform for both perspectives, documenting personal stories while analyzing policy, fiscal, and labor considerations. Social media has further expanded public discourse, enabling real-time engagement and mobilization, and ensuring that the strike remains a province-wide topic of debate. The dispute has thus evolved into a broader societal conversation about the value of public education, labor rights, equity, and government accountability. As the strike persists, its social, economic, and political implications remain deeply intertwined. The dispute highlights the interconnectedness of educators, students, parents, and communities, emphasizing that public education is a critical social institution with far-reaching consequences. Debates surrounding funding, working conditions, and classroom resources engage both direct stakeholders and the wider public, fostering dialogue about equity, access, and the long-term sustainability of the education system. For Alberta, the strike represents both a period of immediate disruption and an opportunity to reassess and strengthen the structures, supports, and values underpinning the province's education system. The resolution of this dispute will shape Alberta's educational landscape, labor relations, and community expectations for years to come, with enduring effects on the province's social cohesion, workforce preparedness, and public confidence in Gov.